I've said this many times before that the book industry is an obsolete industry, that a part of our own learning is understanding physical books and looking at them as art pieces. However, once they are art pieces, often they are objectified. Books have become objects in 21st century post-capitalism. And so what's happening is that the liberal arts major is becoming useless and more obsolete when every decade comes by. In other words, that reading books becomes more like listening to music and collecting cassettes or records or CDs or buying fashionable clothes and posing on Instagram. That books are not really educating ourselves anymore and rather an echo chamber of our own thoughts. That books are an object of social status and signaling one is upper middle class or has crass tastes of belonging through mimic desire. And I've been an advocate of anti-book clubs, that I'm against the concept of pleasure reading, of this kind of basing one's lifestyle on you're bored all the time, so you're just rereading esoteric English language philosophy and logic and opinion and what have you. And this is what artists do in all mediums, cartoonists to cartoons, music to music. They don't produce cartoons or don't produce music or don't write books. Instead, they just consume in this kind of sad ivory tower, higher class bourgeois nature. And that sadly, they say, academia and intellects will say, save books. Books are of value. But now I'm thinking to myself, does writing even have a future? And books are nothing more than dime pulps in itself. Let me elaborate. So one channel I like to watch is Theory Plebe. And Theory Plebe often has really good lectures and philosophies about the books he's reading. And he's a very interesting character. Again, as I've said before, I hate the word hot takes, as that is a postmodern, detached, ironic word to detach any sincere meaning to anything. But anyway, he had a really good video that was uploaded a few hours ago entitled Stop, quote-unquote, Reading, A New Mindset. It's a pretty good video, and I like how he's talking about there is this sad obsession, or at least this obsession of reading the book right. But, I think Theory Plebe wants us all to read books, but he wants us to get rid of the philosophy that there's a correct way of reading and there's a wrong way of reading and things like that. But then again, I'm not so sure where Theory Plebe balances on this, because he says, well, that may be true, but read on your own turf. And I don't know where he's coming from. It's as if he's trying to debunk the, reading supremacists, and then at the same time said, go ahead and read, and I'm just joking. Well, I actually sincerely don't want to read anymore and would rather watch YouTube for the rest of my life. But anyway, I think it's particularly ironic that he's holding up a book called Alone Together, as I think the irony of this book he's showing will come in handy. But anyway, it was this particular YouTube comment I came across from one of his so-called fans, and I'll read you the comments, and you can see for yourself how much vagueness and pretension is in this user. So the user is named E Codex. She writes, first impressions of the title. Already I'm either going to Theory Plebe, you pro-Blinkist traitor, or yes, good A+ content. Edit. As always, yes, thank you for this. Something that took a long time for myself to accept was that the linear, guilt-driven mentality surrounding intellectual learning, the if you don't get it on the first read, you're a dumbass and will never understand, you'll internalize in schooling is so wrong, total BS, especially as someone with a learning disability. It's helped immensely to engage in texts like I'm not even going to say that word. It's about building lattices of information and ideals to revisit holistically. I call it my mental playground. coming into the ivory tower as someone with a blue collar and working class background, where I have developed that method of reading plus learning, much like you have, has really made me realize how toxic the exam pressure of reading comprehension is. I love it. Keep it up. So, as I was making fun of this user for the words that they selected, this almost sounds like a Paul Fussell, class example about how people in the middle class often use strong words to convey their authority. Well, let's look at one of Theory Plebe's fans and their worship of the book cult. Well, 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 what do you have here? You have a white girl of sorts, of upper middle class Anglo-Saxon, with the typical swept bangs, reading some Korean philosophy of sorts, of reading the zero books, of the goofy, accelerationist fad of the last decade or so, of everyone's favorite Mark Fisher, quote unquote, acid left philosopher who I debunked in a previous lecture. And with the makeup and the lipsticks, and it seems a lot of this is just in an echo chamber, that she's really just showing me her shoe collection or her collection of baseball cards or something. But my favorite one is this, where she has the glasses near her plants, and she's looking over like she's happy, and this is a girls' club reading some French philosophy that all young adults should read, especially if they went to state school in Philadelphia or Cincinnati. Oh, and by the way, here's my cope stream. I have a friend named Richie. He's a really cool guy. I definitely think this is Richie's type of gal. If I could just DM her Richie's text, maybe they can get along and I can meet her at a party in Astoria. But she only has this YouTube and private Goodreads account, where this profile is restricted to Goodreads users because you can't make fun of such an obnoxious, shilling, mimic desired clone of sorts. It kind of reminds me of Ralph Wiggum on The Simpsons, where Ralph Wiggum, he's dumb, but at least he's trying to learn, but I'm learning. Hello, Super Nintendo. Well, this is what E-Codex is. E-Codex represents the sphere of many different shades of pale of white women, called Karens, who basically are enjoying the bourgeois nature of having a deracinated identity. That is neither French, Italian, German, or Irish. They're just simply white, living in America, as an autonomized individual, consuming things and living out life, and then marrying the husband, and all they have to do is stay at home, collect the money. And why liberal white women pay a lot of money to learn over dinner how they're racist, right? A deracinated person who thinks everybody is deracinated like me, individualized, universal, pretentious, intellectual. As a digression, I suggest, if you want to read more about the nature of white women, I suggest reading The Confessions of an Anti-Feminist by Anthony M. Ludovisi, and as well as F. Roger Devlin's Sexual Utopia and Power, how some of the sexual dynamics has been working in kind of the hyper post-capitalist era. If you want to understand why there's such things called e-girls, or why white women emulate one another, then I suggest reading Dick Hebdage's Subculture, as capitalism as subculture is nothing more than a byproduct of the capitalist system, and as well as Rene Girard's The Scapegoat, where especially women are biologically dependent, that in the setting of a women's school, women are not being liberated as, feminist and intellectual individuals, but they are rather emulating what would be popular so that other white women can validate them. And of course, this is only the world of white women. I'm not talking about POC women per se, or non-white women, as I myself am a people of color sexual and only prefer to be in the company of POC and Asian women. I detest strongly white women and see the error of their ways as being one of the most horrible things that's ever happened in the white deracination project. And to protest against white women is a powerful cause. Now, another digression I would like to get into is the professionalism that so-called book clubbers like to get into. That's someone who reads lots and lots of books, they're not the one driving trucks in a night shift or working at a Sonic drive-in or being a carpenter. People who read books try to clout their intellectualism as being a lawyer or a politician. And so what do? They wear a suit and tie. Here I have three individuals, all wearing suit and ties. Can you guess what each individual advocates and what they do for a living, right? Each of these individuals wearing a suit and tie reads lots and lots of books in book clubs of sorts and advocates it as their living to what they do, right? And what they want to change the world, like this Christian, martyr, or this Christian proselytizer. Can you guess what they do? Or I'll tell you what they do. Greg Johnson's a white nationalist. He advocates white nationalism, has a book called The White Nationalist Manifesto. Caleb Maupin has City Builders and Vandals, and he's a New Age communist. He is literally a communist who wants to see the hammer and sickle come back to America. And John Jarcerek, or known as Review Bra, is a suit and tie wearing guy who just eats fast food, eats McDonald's, eats Burger King, eats Wendy's, and gets millions of subscribers because of how inane that advocating foodie for crass capitalist fast foodism is. And so here's the praxis. Wear a suit and tie, say anything you want to the dumb public. You can get across white nationalism. You could get across communism. You can get across a highbrow, lowbrow appreciation of fast food fascism, as I would like to call it. Whatever the case is, as long as you wear a suit and tie, you could be advocating that the world is flat, that aliens are real, that Nick Land is correct, and that you are some white girl who wants to have plants and books and lives in Massachusetts and protect your own interest, right? It's insane. A friend showed me a Stacy OkCupid profile, and she had pictures of her by the beach with her white girlfriends, all in her whole, Eurocentric bubble of sorts. And for her bio description, all she wrote was, "I pride myself on my ability to literally make conversations with a brick wall." Now, she's probably saying to herself that she doesn't know what else to say, and that she doesn't, she's being funny and facetious, but actually this comes off as a class protectionist bio, that she's really saying that she doesn't like big talk. She doesn't like smart talk at all. That in her right as a white Stacy, she doesn't want to hear you talking about Nick Land or some Korean philosopher. She doesn't want to hear any of that. She wants you to, drive a red sports car, buy her dinner, make sure your sexual market value is higher than hers, and then whatever you say, I'm just along for the ride. And that don't talk to me if you're going to start with that wordy shit, because white women are not interested in that. So use this contrasting to E-Codex whatever. Is she no different from this? How is the feminism in that YouTube user different? Or is it a vague notion that white women are biologically dependent? All right, as that digression here. And it makes me think about the suit and tie praxis, as I was just saying, that women do the same thing by showing their cleavage and whatever and look sexy to tantalize men like they're something they are not. Now, I'd like to go back on the book subject. Now, right now, as we speak right next to the bed, these are the books I'm reading right now. Don't they look pretty on the spine? I had a previous lecture titled The Analysis of a Physical Book, where I talk about the importance of an aesthetically pleasing spine, sort of. But books are pretty like this, whether it's the big word disordered, or the smooth orange-green of dark ecology, or the poor print-on-demand nature of Journey to Vapor Island, whatever that case is, books look pretty because books will sell and people will buy them out with an impulse nature, that you are collecting these special, pretty, colorful objects. They used to tell you in kindergarten, don't judge your book by its cover. Well, under capitalism, books are always judged by their cover, aren't they? And the content, quote unquote, whatever that vague sense of the word means, inside of said book. That's no different from a comic book, right? Just look up online about 21 awesome bookshelf ideas you need to see. And there's a such thing called the alt-lit movement, where you do judge a book by its cover, and the content, quote unquote, or the value is determined by kind of this NFT baseball trading card. They are art pieces, not literature movement. And so, again, as I was saying, if you believe the value of a book is content, then obviously you don't care about any transcendental nature of learning. Instead, you believe that things are this capitalist supply and demand. Where's the content? You know, on YouTube, there's a button when you look at your videos that says, this is your content. That everything must have value to it. And sometimes it might not have value at all. What is the content of this lecture right now? Is that all we're going to care? There's no such thing as the vessel called a book. The book is just a vehicle for content, right? It's all vague. It's all much this capitalist supply and demand, value as a social construct, meaninglessness, right? That it's a way like buying pretty shoes and validating one's identity through the things that they consume in. If I bought a children's book and it said, great job, you are wonderful, there's no such thing as race, and I kept reading that to myself, it's like looking in the mirror. Well, this is what they're like nowadays. It's like little knickknacks of the middle class fancy of live, laugh, love. That all of books are nothing more than a pretty furniture, IKEA aesthetic-wise, and NFTs are everywhere and invading our spaces. I look at now the liberal arts degree as nothing more than a book club of older white Karens who bicker on about Alison Bechdel or something like that, saying how much they hate men and how much they want to woo over intellectual men like me by pretending to read something obscure and interesting like Richard Garfield's work on game design or something like that. And they think that would reach them in a sexual market high value place in order to woo us over, right? That 4 years in a crappy private school or 4 years in a state school is nothing more than a rom-com book club of sorts at the time of your life. The Eric Erikson psychosocial drama, correct? And then after college, you're going to continue this book club forever and ever and ever to say how much of a Colin Wilson intellect you are, correct? Well, it's kind of like going to the gym and lifting weights and then going back on Instagram, an already monopolized capitalist preying, middle class fancy platform, and then showing to yourself, oh, I'm a POC Asian girl from West Philadelphia, and today I'm reading Crying in H Mart because I'm a good reader. And today I'm going to read Camille Paglia. I don't agree with the hideous writing of Jordan B. Peterson, but hopefully a nice white guy is going to pick me up and we're going to move in a convo in Denver. Well, that's what this so-called intellectualism is like. It's this fake exercising, right? This fake superstition. I know more because I'm reading this Korean philosopher talking about robots, and somehow that makes me just as bright as an actual mathematician when really I'm protecting my class just like the Stacy on our OkCupid profile. Whatever happened about these guys? You know these guys? Do you know any of these guys? I'm not going to tell you these guys' name. I'm just going to assume you know who they are. But likely you probably don't, because 4 of these individuals here belong to an analytic school of thought. Analytics, that does with science and math and philosophy. Well, that's just not popular with young people, especially white impressionable people, especially the middle class, the upper middle class. They think by being an adult, You have to read more artsy things. They have to read what's in, what's popular. It's kind of like this goofy black person comic, right? Don't worry, baby. He's just a nerd. And then the Urkel says, why do they always pick thugs, right? And what are they reading? What's the thug reading? He's reading Wittgenstein. He's reading Deleuze. He's reading Land. He's reading Fisher. All these, like, if you want to be accepted as white people, you read them. They're not profound intellectuals whatsoever. They're basically what the power structure of neoliberal capitalism ideologically wants you to read, and what's popular with youth culture today to be living in 2022, right? And it's like, what about these guys to the right? What about, Michael Dummett? What about Chris Crawford? What about Brian Aldiss? Does any of these names ring a bell? They don't care. Because it shows you that the intellect doesn't care what the mainstream has to say, what the book club, books as objects, have to be so hyper-focused on, that ultimately reading is our own artistic discovery, and we're against everyone else doing our own clandestine esoteric research. It's good to know some of these figures, the mainstream figures as well, but they are not the center of dialogue. They are a form of gentrification. It's basically gentrified hipsters, whites, versus school shooters bent on blowing up middle America schools. I think I would be the latter because I am a struggling intellect against all these so-called pomo white people. And by the way, postmodernity is an insidious enemy because it makes everyone into centrist-loving individuals. And if they are true Marxist, quote unquote, they only like Marxism as an intellectual discipline and not as practice. But again, back to the examples I've been saying, there's just something wrong with book clubs. Book clubs are ultimately a coming to age right for white people to, go work at the record store over there. Go get your place in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Go have your brown Asian girlfriend into, electronic music. Go to the Market Hotel on the weekends. Drink some craft beer. All that crap. You don't care about the school shooters who live in their parents' basement in debt. They're not the cool white people in Cincinnati, in Denver. Book clubs are an excuse to continue an obsolete industry under capitalism and a shame tactic for echoing middle-class seeking plebes. That's why I hate book clubs. I just dislike that whole friggin', what do they call it, left book? Call yourself a leftist, but you're okay with like reactionary alt-right, race is real, JQ stuff. But, we're all left. That's what's so insidious about Mark Fisher. It's like centrist David Foster Wallace injected with, no, don't think that way. Think like a leftist. This is so neoliberal, capitalist, state, FBI ideology. There's so much that, what does it mean to be a leftist anymore? Why can't you say you're right? Because you're a Nazi? Because you hate non-white people? Who said you hate non-white people? Again, it makes me question whether Fusser was right about, does writing have a future? That you're not going to create a class of artists. You're not going to create a class of writers, musicians. You're going to have viewers and spectators and consumers all watching videos all the time and whatnot because nobody wants to read books. And it's not because we have to save the writing industry and everybody has to read again. No, it's just going to get smaller and smaller because technology progresses through, correct? And it creates dumb, subservient people and not true intellectual individuals. An artist is supposed to create art. They're not supposed to contemplate a Susan Sontag Pomo, I'm afraid to read this because there's so much whiteness in it, cultural commentator, right, that doesn't even produce works of art. Turns out the artist doesn't even have a series of pedigrees, and they just do it from that working class position, whatever that is. And it's kind of ironic that people with their master degrees and PhDs all say they're a part of this so-called working class when really they're questioning about what is work, right? But writing, I don't think, has a future, and nor does the book club. The book club is this kind of sad thing that's happening under our conditions of postmodernity, where we are just byproducts of the capitalist system. So I'm against, books as objects and against the book club. And the book club will say, oh, we're against books as objects too. They can be transcendental. But it doesn't matter. You've already objectified yourself. And I really dislike Harold Bloom too for actually saying that books are transcendental as well. But you have to admit to the fact that a book club objectifies books, and books ourselves are nothing more than things to pass the time away with. And rather, we are not being enlightened. We are rather echoing the pretentious nature of upper middle class keeping up with the Jones pursuit. So class dismissed, and thanks for listening. And if you're still listening, actually right now, you can buy some of my books, actually. Almanized Babyface by Pilleater and a Manifesto About Stalking Patrick Hyland can be bought on the following Pilleater link tree that was listed on the very first slide of this lecture. You can go to www.pilleater.com for more information, or do a quick Google search on Almanized Babyface by Pilleater or a Manifesto About Stalking Patrick Hyland. These are certainly books as objects, but also important reads as well to increase your intelligence.